Hi, I'm Arun Thomas. I work for BAE Systems, and I'm very excited that this RISC-V workshop is being held a couple miles from my house. So this was very convenient. Thank you. And so I'm giving an update on building the RISC-V software ecosystem. This is an update on a talk I gave at the last RISC-V workshop. And I did want to say welcome to all the people who are coming from out of town. I think you'll have a good time in Boston and Cambridge. So let's get started. So way back in January at the last RISC-V workshop, it was the third RISC-V workshop at the Oracle Conference Center in Redwood Shores, California, sunny Redwood Shores. I sort of had this call to action. I said, 2016, we should really focus on building out the RISC-V software stack. And so yes, I did put a picture of myself on my slides, and I am wearing the same shirt. So yeah. So I set up this sort of wish list for where I thought we as a community could push the RISC-V software stack in 2016. So one of the big themes was upstreaming. So upstreaming is basically pushing our RISC-V support code upstream to the official maintainers. So for GCC, we'd push that code to GCC so that users in the future, if they just wanted to grab GCC, if they grabbed a GCC distro like a tarball, it would already have RISC-V support. So this makes things a lot more convenient for users. And then for developers, people who are working on the RISC-V toolchain, it makes things easier because you don't have to constantly forward port your changes. So when GCC 6.1 comes out, you don't have to keep merging all of your code. When GCC 7 comes out, you don't have to deal with it either. So the good thing about RISC-V is that it actually has a lot of software. I mentioned this at my last talk. There's support for all of the kind of main open source tool chains. You have support for a number of operating systems, so that's all really great. We just have to push that stuff forward. And so upstreaming support for the tool chains, so the GNU tool chain, GCC, binutils, Clang LVM, and QEMU. We needed to sort of push that forward, as well as upstreaming operating system support for the Linux kernel, Yocto Linux, Gentoo Linux, and some of the BSDs. Another thing that was on my wish list, which was kind of maybe more of a wish than some of the others, was a Debian RISC-V port, which actually is a fair amount of work and requires a lot of this upstream work. So I'm pleased to report that we have made a fair amount of progress. So in terms of upstreaming support for the tool chains, we're kind of getting ready to the point where we could start at least sending out initial patches for review. So thanks to Palmer and Andrew, we actually have upstream tracking Git repos for GCC and binutils. So that's cool. So we can actually start funneling that stuff out. And then, so it's sort of starting to come together. There's been a couple posts on the mailing list. There was one about Clang LVM upstreaming recently. On GitHub, there's been a discussion about GCC upstreaming as well. So I'm hoping that in the next 6 months, we can sort of push this stuff forward. In terms of upstreaming operating systems, there's some really good news there. So FreeBSD 11 will officially support RISC-V. And so that's coming out in a couple months, I think maybe like August, September. So that's pretty exciting that there's official OS support for RISC-V. And I'm hoping that we can sort of push the other operating systems forward in the next 6 months. So upstreaming the Linux kernel, Yocto, Gentoo. And then good news on the Debian RISC-V port is that someone is actually working on this. So there's a talk tomorrow. Okay, so you should go to Manuel's talk. It sounds pretty exciting. I'm really excited about that, so that's pretty cool. So we are making progress, but the question is, can we do better? And can we sort of accelerate the build out of the RISC-V software ecosystem? And so I would say yes. And so this is me again, and this is what I said in January. So I had 3 recommendations. I said we should recruit more developers. We need more people kind of hacking on the RISC-V software stack. We need to reduce the startup cost for new developers. It's still kind of, there's a number of things that you have to do to kind of get up and going in RISC-V. It could scare away new developers. And we needed more specifications and more documentation. So at the time, the privilege spec was not available. There's no platform specification. Some of that stuff is, so the privilege spec is out now, privilege spec 1.9, so that's really exciting. And so we also still need sort of more of a platform specification. But so these were, so all of these recommendations still apply, but I'm gonna sort of update them. And I think we should definitely do all of these, but I think there's maybe a couple more, there's a couple things that are maybe a little bit more important before we get to these things. Or I'm gonna sort of tweak the advice a little bit. So that was my take in January. So in July, I would say that the foundation should fund developers to build core software infrastructure. So originally I was saying it was more of an outreach thing. We should kind of get more people developing RISC-V. Now I'm saying that we need core people who are dedicated to pushing the RISC-V software stack forward. So the Berkeley folks and the folks now at Sci-5 have done a great job. We have a good initial software stack, but to really push it forward, we need to get to do the upstreaming, to really make the software stack production ready. We need full-time people to do that. And this is my take. I'm not speaking for the foundation. We as a community are going to have to decide if this makes sense. The foundation has limited resources, but I think there's some precedent for this. So if you look at what's happened with the ARM world, if you look at the Linaro effort, they really pushed the ARM software stack forward and kind of sorted out a lot of kind of big problems by funding and really pushing this forward. The other recommendation I have is that we should start deciding on a process for proposing ISA enhancements. And we should start that now. So the great thing is the RISC-V is open instruction set standard, and that's great. But we need to move to a more community-driven specification process for ISA enhancements. So for instance, the privilege spec, the privilege spec is very complicated. There were a number of changes that need to happen, but it took a little over a year to kind of do that specification process. And so it made, as a result, software stacks like other OS ports have kind of lagged. So if we could do more of this stuff in a community-driven way, maybe more on the mailing list and more, I have a proposal for what this might look like, a straw man. I think it would sort of make it easier for people who are developing software like me, as well as people who are trying to propose other ISA extensions or have other ideas about where to push the RISC-V community forward and the ISA forward. So as I said, I am arguing that the RISC-V Foundation should fund developers. This is just my opinion. You may disagree. And so there's a number of things these folks would do. Really what they're doing is basically making the RISC-V software stack production ready. So if you're building a product, you want to make sure that all of this stuff really works. And so having full-time people to do this, dedicated people whose only job is this, we could kind of really push this forward. So the students at Berkeley, they have to publish research papers. The folks at Sci-5, they have to deal with VCs with pitchforks. We really need sort of dedicated people who can sort of focus on this. So things they can work on are upstreaming. They could be maintainers, porting software RISC-V, really kind of focusing on performance optimization and analysis, enhancing test suites, methodologies, continuous integration, release management, all of the stuff that you need to do to kind of really have a production-ready software stack. And there are a number of funding models for this. So the Linaro effort I mentioned earlier, the Linux Foundation, the FreeBSD Foundation. So Linaro has this idea of assignees. So essentially, member companies will donate employees to Linaro for a fixed period of time, and they'll work on the kernel stuff or tool chain or things like that. That's one model. The Linux Foundation has this idea of fellows, so they actually employ people to kind of push Linux forward. So Linus Torvalds is a Linux Foundation fellow. The FreeBSD Foundation also has employees, for instance, to do release management and things like that. They also have a grant process where they can fund developers. So I think we should consider this. I think it's maybe a good way to sort of push the software stack forward, and we should sort of talk about this during the committee meetings and throughout the workshop. So in addition to this, I also think we should really start right now talking about what the ISA enhancement proposal, the process for enhancing the ISA looks like. How do we propose additions, ISA extensions, and things like that? And so we have there are a number of people to do this, right? I mean, so if you look at networking, if you look at the internet working groups, so you have the W3C and the IEEE, they have a standard process. The IETF has their RFC process, or request for comments. The IEEE has actually standardized an ISA before, the Spark ISA. So we can look at these communities for guidance. In the language communities, ISO standardizes a number of things, but they also standardize C and C++. Python has the Python enhancement proposals, the PEPs. Java has JSRs, Java specification requests. The Rust language has an RFC process, and Apple's Swift language also has a Swift evolution process. And these are all different models for doing this. Closer to our community, the low-risk project has sort of the way they do discuss this sort of thing is on Fabricator, so that's another way to go. So these are all different models, and we can sort of look at them and see what fits our community. Some of them are higher overhead, some of them are lower overhead, and so they're different constraints, but we should sort of look at them and see what makes sense for our community. So I'm going to put forward a straw man proposal. It's not what we want to do, but it's kind of a start for discussion. There's a GitHub repo that has some more details. And so the proposal that I'm going to make is that we should do more of this specification development on GitHub. So I'm calling it RISC-V RFCs, so kind of based on the IETF process, so request for comments. And so when you have an ISA extension, when you want to make some change to the ISA, you write an RFC. The format is, I chose Markdown since it works reasonably well, but maybe you want to use LaTeX. We should discuss what this will look like. And if you want to submit a new RFC, you can submit a GitHub pull request for this. The nice thing about GitHub is that everything, all the other RISC-V stuff is on GitHub, and so if we could move the RFCs there too, it would be kind of nice. And then we could do the discussion on the ISADEP mailing list as well as GitHub. So this is a straw man. It's probably not what we want to do, but the key thing is that we should start thinking about this process now. The details don't matter as much. We can sort of refine them as they go. And so if you do have ideas, this repo is up there. You can submit a pull request. Maybe we can talk about this more on some of the mailing lists and during the workshop. My hope is that the next version of the privilege spec 1.10 or 2.0, or whatever it is, will actually go through some kind of RFC process. So we can do more of this in a community-driven way, smaller incremental steps, and just it would generally be better for the community to get more feedback on this sort of on these specifications. So in summary, we are making progress on the software stack, and RISC-V has really grown in a short amount of time. I mean, just listening to Rick talk about what's happened in the last couple of years has been pretty amazing. So we're making progress on the software stack, but we could be moving a lot faster. And so my two recommendations are that the foundation should fund software developers. This is my opinion. We should decide if it makes sense as a community. I also think the community should decide on a process for proposing ISA enhancements. There's a number of different models we could follow. I've put forward a straw man. I'd like to hear what you think we should be doing as well. And so I think RISC-V is a really important thing for our industry. I mean, having a completely open standard is really an amazing thing. And so with your help, I think we can really push the hardware and the software ecosystem forward. And so with your help, we can make ISAs great again. And so, yeah, this is just my opinion. So I'd like to hear what you think, and we should kind of start a discussion. And I'm hoping we can kind of keep the discussion going throughout the workshop, the committee meetings, and on the mailing list. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Arun. Any questions?
My name is Michael Berger. I'm unaffiliated. So earlier, we had another gentleman, I think his name was Chris, who's working on the efficiency of the instruction set. And then I asked him a question about the software because he put some questions about the language in one of his final slides. So I guess you're the one who I need to speak to then. I'm the one who opened up the ticket for LLVM for upstreaming that. And that came from trying to, from a desire to port Rust over to RISC-V. So is that something that's on the roadmap? And then are there other languages that we want to get into the ecosystem sooner rather than later?
There are a number of people who are interested in LVM. In general, there's interest in upstreaming, and I think there's interest in getting other languages running. There's people who are working on Go. I think it'd be interesting to get Rust on there as well. So we should maybe, I don't know, if you're going to be around during the poster session, we should get some people together and sort of talk about how we can make that happen.
Okay.
In terms of funding efforts, if I multiply the numbers right from Rick's first slide, there's about $200,000 a year from fees, which has to cover Rick and staff and stuff like that. So it doesn't seem possible that fund can fund researchers, can fund development. So, and you would say funding would be assigning employees to work on it?
Yeah, I mean, that's what Lennar has done, and it's been pretty successful
and
for
so
them.
somehow there's like a scoreboard or something that we put this many employees on it and you get points? Yeah. Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be one way to go. Like, get someone, I mean, we have like, looking at how many people have joined the foundation, if a few of those people could kind of donate some of their compiler experts or kernel experts for X percentage of time, I think that would be a good way to go. But I mean, Rick's job also is to grow the foundation, get more people writing checks, so that would be another way to go. But we have we have limited resources.
Yeah, that it just seems, it's amazing
right.
where it is, but it just doesn't seem that there's, one full-time programmer would be hundreds of thousands of dollars, right?
Yeah.
So,
No, I mean, I think the assignee model is probably a better way to go. But also, what the FreeBSD Foundation does is they have sort of short-term contracts, so they're the grants. So you so the way the ARM v8 port got done is basically they funded Andy Turner to work on it for a fixed period of time. So in that case, you don't have to pay, like, it's a smaller amount of money for a shorter period for a very fixed purpose. So that's one way to go, is just to do a grant model in addition.
So maybe just a couple of comments on the Linaro model. The SoC guys, the silicon guys, pay a large fee.
It's a lot of money.
To
Yeah.
Linaro, way larger than any of our membership fees.
Yeah. So I think
just a couple of data points.
No, that's a
I think
very
it's all
important.
open for discussion. Right?
No, that's a good point.
They've got a couple of hundred development engineers,
No, it's huge.
about 100 of which are paid staff members in Linaro.
Yep.
And then the rest are contributed from member companies and so on.
Yep.
Right. So it's certainly doable, but it's a significantly different undertaking than what we've talked about so far within the foundation.
Yep, I completely agree. But I think it's something that we should
It's
consider
good for
maybe in the
discussion.
future.
One other thing, I looked into Linaro as well, and what I hadn't realized was it's not just ARM. It's actually, they have a process for having other ISAs
Yeah.
pushed into Linaro. So power is already there. So if
that's a good
somebody
idea.
wanted to push the rock uphill, they could try and get RISC-V into there.
That's a good idea, actually.
So I'm Martin Schöberl from Technical University of Denmark. Just a quick one. Is anyone working on the Java virtual machine porting to RISC-V?
Did you say Java virtual machine?
Yes. Anyone working on this one?
I think so.
There is a student at Berkeley who's been working with Oracle. The OpenJDK is the interpreter level has been done a while ago. I think that's up and out there. He's working on the C2 level of the compiler with Oracle for RISC-V. So he's been making good progress on that. The second level, I think the 0, 1, 2. He's working on 2, if you know the hotspot terminology.
Okay, cool.
The question was, is there a plan to publish trackable, like machine-readable format of the specifications? Yeah.
Yeah, so there was actually a meeting on Monday with people here at MIT and around who've been working on formal specs for RISC-V. And so yes, there is a plan to derive everything else from the machine-readable spec. But that's one of the things that we're kicking off, hopefully as a working group, is the formal spec. And then from that, hopefully we can derive a reference model and human-readable specs and various other useful tools as well. For example, to help drive verification of implementations. So that's people are actively, and Prashant who's here somewhere, sitting up the back. Yeah, he's been developing a spec in L3, which is a description I think is pretty complete for the sequential for one core. And the discussion now is around how to support, how to describe the memory model, as Arvin's talk today was about on that topic. Time frame, availability. I think we probably need some help on back-end work. I think one thing is capturing the spec, and then there is, from that spec, producing this other collateral, such as the documentation. And so I think a documentation working group is one thing. One thing we know people want is for member companies who are building their own variants, they want to be able to quickly generate manuals, with their own variants in and things like that. That's a great thing for people to volunteer to work on.
Yeah, Karthik Swaminathan from IBM. Is there any support for both Little Indian and Big Indian? Like currently, I guess it's just Little Indian, but do you have any plans for developing both Little and Big Indian?
Yeah, let me answer Arun's questions for him. Yes, if you look at the manual, it does say that we support Little Endian natively, and Big Endian is a non-standard extension. And if somebody wants to work on defining that, that'd be a great thing for somebody else to go look at doing.